This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hi everyone, this is Fionapollo, and I have a confession to make. I'm a big ol' softie who loves films and shows with happy endings and slice-of-life antics, where the worst thing that can happen is your lifelong friend leaving home in pursuit of their own dreams. I've gone through some stuff in life, and these happy-go-lucky shows were a way to romanticize the little things, even in your lowest moments. Sometimes these shows are something to help you look back upon happier times when things were simpler, or when you had certain people in your life, or were in a place that brought you peace. These shows almost work as a kind of time capsule to that effect, a place where you can go back and feel all of that happiness again, even for a brief moment. And for that reason, today I wanted to throw my hat in the ring regarding the topic of comfort shows and the respective place in today's climate. If you're not sure what I mean, I'm talking about shows that make a person feel nostalgic or reminiscent of safer, calmer, or simpler times, or shows that people feel they can retreat to away from real life for a while. Most of the time, this can often mean the show is a childhood or kid-friendly cartoon, and this can sometimes come with the assumption of the show being heavily censored or even childish, but that's very seldom the case, otherwise you wouldn't go back to it enough for it to warrant the kind of relevance in one's mind that we're talking about. I got the idea for this following some discussion arising to do with Saberspark's video from a while ago on Bee and Puppycat, which, if you don't know, is actually a comfort show of mine. I had the pleasure of seeing the series evolve from a YouTube pilot in 2015 to a 10-episode miniseries, then to receiving a Netflix adaptation. But even with that in mind, I'm not immune to the show's flaws. The Netflix adaptation of the show in particular had some really glaring issues, of which aspects like pacing take the forefront. The show was never a narrative masterpiece, mind you, but that was also never really the point of it. If you were to ask a fan what it is about the show that seems to have such a big appeal, one such answer you'll probably come across a lot is, I don't know, it just feels comfortable to watch. And I agree. A lot of people agree with that actually, which is why they also began to discuss the video Saberspark made and were repeating the whole comfort sentiment ad nauseum. So today I wanted to kind of go into that and piggyback off of it and explain what people might mean by that exactly, as well as my own personal attachments to these types of shows to give a bit of insight into this whole concept surrounding a comfort show. I feel like a lot of the time my videos going into animation can sometimes seem as if they have a discombobulated message. Sometimes I'll say we should have more shows that don't rely on gag humor or shock value, then on a dime also say that I like slapstick but lament that a lot of shows don't really do them correctly anymore, which is due to a lot of things such as changing times and censorship regulations. But my point is, for many people it probably feels like the collective wants and sentiments surrounding animation as a medium are constantly shifting, but that's not necessarily it. The real reason I think this is, personally, is because animation encompasses just as broad a scope of themes, genres, and aesthetics as live action does. Animation can be anything, and trying to create a masterpiece of insightful or awe-inspiring narration or visuals isn't every show's priority. Sometimes the aim is just to be comfortable. So please indulge me as I discuss this topic and explain why this concept has risen in prominence, as well as the part it plays in modern culture. If you like what you're hearing, then please consider liking and subscribing. I talk mainly about animation, fandom culture, and various happenings within the internet art sphere. Please note that a lot of what I say in my videos is purely speculative and not based in fact, unless evidence is given to state otherwise. Look, I'm just a YouTuber, okay? I like to talk about random stuff, and other people seem to like it when I do that too, and it makes me money, so I'm gonna keep doing it. If I do get anything wrong or say anything that doesn't seem right though, please tell me. Feedback is greatly appreciated here. Without further ado, let's begin. So, to kick things off, there's been a lot of newfound buzz around embracing your comfort shows or things that bring you joy, hasn't there? Why do we think that is? Well, personally, I think it's due to a combination of things, namely the rise in mental health awareness and acceptance, the current state of world affairs, and a wider recognition and appreciation for different types of media. Looking at mental health first, it's estimated that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England alone. According to research carried out by University College London, data from 2,248 general practices was used from 2000 to 2020. In total, the data accounted for 237,123,186 years of people's lives, or person years. Overall, the incidence of common mental disorders increased between 2000 to 2019, from 55.9 to 76.9 per 1,000 person years. Within this, important differences were seen by age, with rates more than doubling in 16 to 24-year-olds. And it's very important to recognize that yes, the rate at which people are diagnosed or suspected of having mental health issues has risen extremely rapidly in the last 20 years. This isn't just purely due to people wanting to be a part of the crowd or wanting to be special or whatever kind of boomer explanation people think up about that kind of stuff. The truth is that human brains are extremely complex, and more awareness has not only led to a reduced stigma towards admitting to having a mental health issue, which in itself is a big factor of mental health statistics rocketing upwards, but also in the idea that many people have had aspects of various disorders but in much smaller forms that may not necessarily impact their lives all that negatively. And all of those minuscule factors, similar to personality traits that aren't linked with mental health, make up the building blocks of who we are as people, our likes and dislikes, how we react to certain situations, etc. And that last one in particular is not often helped by the issue of our next point. So we're all pretty aware of this by now. The world is a mess. It's one big, giant, corrupted, dangerous mess. There are several wars going on, thousands upon millions of people are suffering, hate speech and riots are breaking out all over, and people generally are looking at all of this, even those who are at a somewhat comfortable distance from it all, and becoming stricken or feeling a sense of hopelessness because they don't know what they can do as individuals. Well, correction, there are a lot of things you can do, and it's worth noting that people try. They really do. But even the act of helping, when there are so many different ways to do it, can become so paralyzing. Just speaking as a Brit, I don't know if anyone's seen the news or read about it online, but we have a rioting problem going on right now, and while it's obvious that the people partaking in it are, morons, it's still terrifying. These people are dangerous and genuinely violent and are putting people's lives at risk for nothing more than what they could deem as being the wrong creed or colour. And I'm saying that as a white person who decidedly isn't being targeted, but I can imagine that some of those targeted groups may well be using this exact type of coping mechanism just to keep their mind occupied from the fear they might be feeling. Maybe a family are watching an old fave from their parents' home country that brings back memories of where they used to live when they were younger. Perhaps a young girl is watching Moon Girl and wishing she could fight crime the way Lunella does. But people don't always want to watch something that inspires them to be brave or stand up, because sometimes that just isn't what an individual might need at that exact moment. In times of extreme uncertainty and distress, they might just want to look at something with a colourful visual or that has a good soundtrack, or indeed something that just feels cozy as a form of self-soothing. A lot of the time, these media properties may not always be the most well-constructed things to ever exist, and the truth is, that's kind of the point. With something that is considered a true cinematic masterpiece or whatever, people tend to dedicate more brain power to noticing every small detail that they can, and to me at least, that doesn't sound comfortable. That sounds more like I'm prepping for a quiz, which, if it's anything to do with like a Marvel movie or something, let's be honest, you probably are. I will just say that while it is oftentimes entertaining to deconstruct various shows that perhaps aren't the height of narrative mastery, it is important to understand that story writing, character design, and the like are all skills that take time to cultivate into something you can even contemplate about sharing with people, let alone putting on a TV or a computer screen. Not everything you make will appeal to everyone, and it won't always be your magnum opus either. Similar to how you can't just craft a masterpiece with no previous experience, unless you're superhuman, of course. So if you do want to consider learning how to effectively write screenplays or episode scripts, design characters, and even produce your own animations, or even just begin learning to draw, then I would heavily encourage you to check out today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for curious creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and so much more. Skillshare can also be a great way to take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles up to that next level. Full disclosure, but despite having a master's, amazingly, I do not know everything there is to know about animation and storytelling. I know, shocker, I'm a fraud. But that will never be the case, largely due to the ever-changing landscape of the world of entertainment, and there is also a heavy amount of overlap in a lot of the practices within the field. So it's always a good idea to check back in every once in a while to see if there are any new developments or branches that you can grab onto. And that's where Skillshare can really come in handy. If you're a beginner and aren't sure where to begin, for example, I would definitely recommend Learning to Draw, a comprehensive intro to drawing foundations and style by Mimi Cho. During my little summer holiday in SoCal, I took the time to have a think about what I really wanted to improve on as a creator, and I think probably the biggest thing was organization, since I'm always doing things so last minute. So I've been trying to get back into using my bullet journal since I dropped off a bit last year, and thanks to Skillshare, it's been a pretty smooth transition back into that organizational mindset. I've been following the Learning Path Organization and Planning for Creative Freelancers, which is a more curated set of classes aimed at helping you master specific skills. This one in particular includes tips on how to fight back against procrastination, how to better manage my time, and how to build up an idea before finally releasing the finished product into the world. If any of you maybe have a bit of spare time this summer and aren't quite sure what to do with it, taking up a class to learn a new skill or even polish up an existing one is never a bad choice. And the first 500 people to use my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial. So get learning on Skillshare today. Anyway, back to comfort shows. So, I wanted to give my own specific example of this kind of situation with a series that got me through a very rough patch following 2020. And also, I just want an excuse to talk about how much I love this show in general because it feels like just the best possible example of what I'm trying to get at here. This is going to be somewhat heavy, so please just bear that in mind, but it's something I've looked back on for almost 4 years now, and it doesn't hurt anymore to bring it up, so it feels like the right time to finally put it in the past. So for context, the pandemic had just ravaged the globe, causing millions of people to be trapped at home and physically isolated from the rest of civilization, more or less. Lots of people could deal with that just fine, but I was not one of them. I was stuck on the other side of the country, away from my friends and family who I fretted over because many of them were vulnerable or had dependents who were immunocompromised. I was actually so badly affected by the isolation and the panic surrounding the mortality rate of COVID at the time that I ended up developing this weird case of thanatophobia, which, if you don't know, is a very intense and irrational fear of death. I couldn't even play Mario games because the prospect of Mario, quote, dying on screen gave me heart palpitations. When I closed my eyes to sleep at night, my brain convinced itself I wouldn't wake back up and I could only drop off if I was listening to something incredibly inoffensive, like a No Straight Roads gameplay to try and convince my brain that it was still active. It was awful, and I went through that for about 5 months. Even the smallest implication towards death made my guts twist in a way that it was both the one thing I tried my hardest to avoid, as well as the only thing I could think of for days on end. It sounds so silly to admit now, because here I am 4 years later, obsessed with the queer horror genre. I'm trying to build back up like a healthy relationship with death following all of that, so yeah. All I did was be stuck in my student house as well. Like, some people actually died during this time. I think this also might actually be the first time I've opened up about how bad it really was as well. Largely because I finally started going to therapy and I'm being encouraged to talk about things more that bothered me. I don't think anyone outside of my partner actually knew how low my mental state was at this time. And a lot of people still don't talk about that when it comes to 2020 because a lot of it is just kind of marred by the fact that people got to stay indoors all the time and enjoyed the fun part of it, but they don't want to acknowledge like the anxiety, the fear, like all of the uncertainty surrounding it. That is also something that tends to be a factor in comfort shows or media. There's a fair bit of shame that becomes associated with admitting to have certain things affect you to such a degree. So we instead seek comfort in things to take our minds off of whatever is bothering us until we feel ready to build ourselves back up. And even during times when you have a wee bit of a relapse or something, those media properties are still around to fall back on again and again. And I definitely think COVID exacerbated that. I'm a lot better now, but getting back on topic, during that time, there were precious few pieces of media that I could safely indulge in without getting the shakes, having a panic attack, or something to that degree. And one of those shows that helped calm me down just so happened to be the series Bee and Puppycat. Bee and Puppycat is a miniseries turned Netflix cartoon created by Natasha Allegri, who also worked on Cartoon Network shows like Adventure Time as a character designer and storyboard revisionist. She's also the creator behind the majority of the gender-swapped Adventure Time characters too, most notably Fiona and Cake. On the 11th of July 2013, the first part of the pilot, which also functioned as the first episode, was released on Cartoon Hangover's YouTube channel, with the second half releasing on the 9th of August that same year. To date, the combined parts of the pilot have approximately 10 million views, which is a really big achievement. The show's popularity was no doubt boosted by the current style of animation at the time too, which is dubbed, inaccurately I may add, as the CalArts style. Shows like Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, and The Amazing World of Gumball all had a similar visual direction that dominated this era of children's cartoons, so Bee and Puppycat blended in really well. I think what really caused me to love this show so much was that anytime I watched an episode, no matter what iteration, it took me back to that time when I had just decided I wanted to pursue animation because it was the one thing that made me happy and kept me pushing through some pretty dark times. Through the uncertainty of not knowing what to do about your future, feeling like so many things are out of your control, there was at least a safe, cozy place I could escape to as Bee and Puppycat gallivanted across space on their latest temp assignment, or when they hung out with Cass, Deckard, or Cardamom. Creating something like it became something I wanted to chase because it felt more realistic than wanting to create a masterpiece. Something simple, something safe, something happy. And another really great thing about that is that a big aspect of the show is watching the characters still have fun, be silly, and enjoy themselves in the more mundane plot lines that don't go anywhere, while still having this overarching plot in the background of what's going on in space. Why is Puppycat being hunted? And who is Puppycat really? The show feels like it perfectly reflects that sentiment of having things that, yes, are important and will need to be addressed eventually, but for now it's all right to indulge in the little things to keep your spirits high. I have a lot of regrets in life, but trying to pursue happiness definitely isn't one of them, and I think that's an important discussion when we look at the whole picture surrounding comfort shows. We often tend to use them as an emotional crutch when parts of life, or even when the world in general feels overwhelming, and it can be very beneficial to your mental health, but there are limits to it. Just like the characters, the things we are ignoring will catch up with us eventually. And on that subject, I think this also ties into the matter of the whole nostalgia craze we've been experiencing for the past few years, and I think that very much ties into this whole world collective of seeing how terrible things have gotten, or even just now realizing it when comparing it to when you were younger, and wanting to retreat to a time when you were more oblivious and didn't feel so guilty about doing so. The issue I find is that sometimes people can depend on it too much, and it ends up somewhat stunting you. And this can also end up developing into a form of willful ignorance, also known as ostrich syndrome, where it begins to feel like an impossible task to try and see the forest for the trees. At some point, you do need to be able to take the initiative to come out of that comfort blanket and spread it out on the floor. Make your space a bit bigger so that you don't start to feel confined by it as time goes on, because it will eventually begin to constrict you, and even make it difficult for others to reach out to you. This will indeed sometimes mean having to deal with things you don't want to, and that blanket will start to fray at the edges, but by the time that happens, you'll find that you don't feel the need to rely on it quite as much anymore, and it will still be there to go back to when you need it. If what I've shared here today struck a chord with anyone, then I hope you take to heart what I've said. Having shows or media, or even just things that bring you comfort and safety, should never be something that you feel ashamed of, and they can be really beneficial to you. And that rings especially true for the reason those comforts may be in place. But there is a big world out there, and the bad parts are only one side of it. There's a lot of good to be seen as well if you can bring yourself to venture out there. Pursuing YouTube was my way of doing that after being in such a bad place previously, and the way you go about it might be completely different, but even those new experiences might someday themselves turn into comforts that you will come back to again and again. And while you're out experiencing all of these amazing things or doing important work, the existing comforts will always be there for you to go back to in some shape or form. Media can be powerful, but so can you. I know especially in the digital age, reliance on media is kind of a blessing and kind of a curse, but you are more than your limitations, habits, or even your fears. I am all for becoming the best version of yourself through your own merit, but also, sometimes, it's just nice to be comfy. And I think that's it from me, folks. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and consider joining my new Patreon too. Do you have a comfort series? If so, then what is it, and why exactly does it comfort you? That doesn't have to be a super deep reason either. You can just like something because you like it. It'll be interesting to hear what people say, because some people's comfort series are probably not what you would expect. A very, very big thank you to my new patrons. Thank you so much for signing on so quickly already. I hope everything's okay so far. I am learning these things as I go, because for some reason I can't seem to just plan things out first. I have to dive in half-baked. But I like to think that everything seems to be going well so far, but please tell me if you have any suggestions or feedback. In the YouTube Peeps tier, we have Jessie Sparks, Mystic Mind, Lauren R, Pedanticat, and Ash Valentine. In the indie production tier, we have Morgan Le Fay Dethen. Thank you so much for supporting me. Until next time!